Okay. Got 3 minutes until we start. We got 2 people watching. I'd say that's pretty good for a last minute thing. Is my voice going through? Yeah, let's see. Is my voice going through? Yeah. Yeah. We're all together. We're all one. 3 people watching. Dang, man. This is not for those 3 people here. This is not going to be like a presentation type thing because I don't know everything, you know. I've done a lot of research and I hang out with a lot of smart people, you know, working with Kavri, the Monero project's Kavri. But, you know, let's learn together and go ahead and type in the chat and say hi. Starting in a couple minutes, hopefully we get maybe 2 other people here and we can have a conversation about privacy and why it's important in this world, why it's important, period, you know, financial privacy, internet privacy, all these different things. So, just give people a couple of minutes to get here. The tickets are sold out, I'm sure. So, let's make sure everything's fine. Hello! Hello, everyone. Trying to work out the stream lag situation that is potentially being a thing. If you can hear me, go ahead and type in the live chat. Let me go ahead and, sorry, let me take a look in my phone and start streaming myself. Say hi. Hey everybody. Hey everybody. Good to have everybody here. Yeah, okay, the lag doesn't seem to be that bad. Alright, it's 10:01. We are officially past time, and seeing as how nobody has typed in the live chat, go ahead, if you're here, oh, 4 people, if you're here, go ahead and type in the live chat. Let's say hi. Let me introduce myself. My name is Diego Salazar. I am a active community member in Monero, but I am first and foremost, I consider myself a budding privacy advocate. I believe privacy is very important for people, both financial privacy, internet privacy. I know that there are historically repercussions to people not having privacy when either governments or corporations or what have you can do whatever they want. It always ends in disaster, you know, and taking people's privacy away little by little, just chipping it away, has been detrimental to society, I feel, and improving privacy can only be an improvement. We got nowhere to go but up with privacy. So, because we reached a big low. So the goal when we're talking about privacy is like, what tools are necessary? How do we achieve this? What sorts of privacy are we trying to achieve? And unfortunately, people, even if they understand things like, you know, blockchain technology. So when we're talking about cryptocurrencies, you know, and this was specifically this conference, mini conference of myself and a couple of people was specifically made in response to my personal disappointment with what has been the Wraith protocol release this year. And, you know, I just want to say first and foremost, I don't hate Verge currency. I don't think that it offers what it says it offers, but I don't hate it. I want Monero to have a lot of competition. I am not married to the Monero coin. I want it to have competition because competition pushes privacy forward, pushes the technology forward. You know, you got awesome things like Zcash, and I don't believe their implementation of ZK Snarks was very fantastic, but, you know, ZK Snarks itself is a great technology. If we could just solve the trusted setup issue. But for privacy, it's a fantastic technology. You know, not talking about the currency aspects. For privacy, it's amazing. So we really need competition to Monero. I will say this: Monero needs competition, competent competition. We need more people working in the privacy space, in the privacy crypto space. And at the moment, there just is not anything that offers good competition for Monero, and it's because privacy is hard. Real privacy is hard. Putting together, okay, as an example, I'm sorry, you can go onto YouTube, okay, Tor is not enough to be private. These things are not enough to be private. You can go onto YouTube and type in Tor busts and stuff like that, and then there's presentations from people at DEF CON about people who have been busted even when they're using Tor because they have, you know, bad operational security. You know, there's things like correlation attacks, there's Sybil attacks, there's all sorts of attacks that can actually be done on the Tor network without compromising the Tor software itself. But these things can still work to catch people, and so much more is necessary to be private in this day and age. You need to have what we call a threat model. And if you don't know what a threat model is, you know, go ahead and Google it. I'll give a very small summation here. A threat model is when you look at the potential resources of an adversary, somebody who is trying to compromise you. And it can be compromised for giving you targeted ads, it could be compromised for the most extreme of extreme cases, like a government who is trying to catch you for, being a whistleblower or doing something that they don't agree with. You have to look at who your adversary is. Maybe you're just trying to buy a Christmas gift for your wife and you don't want her to know about it. So that's your threat model. Your wife and all the resources available to her, that's your threat model. That's what you're operating under against. That's what you're trying to stay safe from, which is very different than a threat model of wanting your finances private from your friends and family. Or it may be different from wanting your finances private from corporations so you don't get targeted ads, which is, again, a step below state-level actors. If you don't have a threat, and the sad thing is threat models are not talked about in the cryptocurrency space by very many people. This is especially important when we're talking about privacy coins. It makes no sense to try to have a privacy coin or a privacy technology period without working out a threat model first. It really doesn't. And I would make the claim that when somebody claims we have better privacy than this other coin, they are essentially making the claim that under a more adversarial threat model, we would perform better. And that's really what you have to look at. Okay, what resources are the people we are trying to defend ourselves from? What do they have, and what do we need to do in turn? As an example, and this is kind of crazy when you think about it, there's something called stylometry. And what stylometry is it analyzes the way that people type and the way that they talk via their text. So let's say you have several different identities on Tor, which is very recommended if you want to remain anonymous. You need to change identities fairly often. Let's say you have several different identities on Tor, and let's say you're using them all simultaneously for different purposes. And you type the same way, you talk the same way, the sentence structure, the flow of your paragraphs and stuff like that, all of these things are now being used to identify people. All of these things are used like a fingerprint. It's like, well, this person is the equivalent of this person. Then they can go on the ClearNet and find somebody on the ClearNet, an account that actually has your name on it, and say, this matches precisely the way that this person talks. And this has nothing to do with the cryptography of, Tor or other different ways of staying anonymous, via software, but it has everything to do with the way that you personally present yourself, which just goes to show that having the best software is not going to keep you safe, but it super helps. So, all that being said, we're talking about kind of privacy and why it's important. I just said we've got one more person watching now. That's kind of cool. I'd like to take a look kind of at the cryptocurrency space as a whole and make the argument that for privacy coins, it's not enough to just know about blockchain technology. Okay, for privacy coins, it's not enough to just know about blockchain technology. So a lot of people feel very smart because they've read, they've done the research, they understand how blockchains work. They understand how, they've read Satoshi's white paper, they've read other people's white paper, and they see the blockchain behind it, and they see how that works. And that's fantastic. That's step one. That's step one to get into cryptocurrencies. If you do not understand how blockchain works, I highly recommend you understand before you put more money in. If you don't know what you're investing in, that's not a good plan, man. And I do believe blockchain is going to do some great things in the world, not just with cryptocurrencies, but there's other use cases out there. But you need to understand it. You really do. And if you don't understand it and the white papers are too technical and stuff, hop on YouTube, hop on Google, type in blockchain explained, or something like that. It's in this day and age with the internet, it's so easy to learn these things. It's so easy to learn these things. And heck, if after watching those things you're something you still don't understand it, contact me. I've given a lot of presentations to my family. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I think I do a pretty good job of bringing it down to a very small level. just want to take a pause real quick. Any of the 6 people watching right now have access to the chat feature here on YouTube if you're signed in. Say something, say hi. I'd love to hear from you guys. But so I'm making the argument that for a privacy cryptocurrency, knowledge of the technology of blockchain is not enough. Okay, you also need. Oh, hey guys, great, nice to see you guys there. You also need, when you're using a privacy cryptocurrency, you also need, in addition to fundamentally understanding how blockchains work, you also need an understanding of how privacy, operational security, threat modeling, and stuff works. If you do not have this knowledge, you cannot make informed decisions about whether the privacy claims of a cryptocurrency is good or not. Okay, and please, I mean, I would highly encourage. I did this, I did this to learn. I was watching a whole bunch of things on YouTube from DEF CON. I talked to people like Anonymal, who works on the Kavri project. I work on the Kavri project from the Monero project, which is an implementation of I2P and C++ instead of Java. Write down some key words that I'm saying. So if you don't know what these things are, you can look them up later. You can go on YouTube. So if there's a term that you don't understand, or heck, you can even ask in the chat, hey, I don't know what this is. Can you go ahead and elaborate on that? And I'd love to. My main goal here is to advance the privacy conversation. What is real privacy? How can we achieve that? How can we critically analyze claims from cryptocurrencies, from browser technologies like I2P and Tor? How can we critically analyze these, and how can we make our own threat models of things that we're hiding against or hiding from, to make educated, informed decisions? And maybe we ourselves are not hiding from anything. Like I myself, I live in a first world country. I'm not necessarily hiding it from anything except maybe, targeted ads or stuff like that. But I realize that there are people in the world that are hiding from something. Their lives depend on this stuff, and I want to be a part of the conversation, of the software development stuff that enables these people to survive. So I just got a question. So this conference related to the most private cryptos, newest, awesomest, privatist update. What are you talking about? Verge? Are you talking about Monero? What are you talking about? No, this conference is less about talking about one cryptocurrency and is more about talking about privacy in general and how we can critically validate claims made from privacy cryptocurrencies, including Nav and Verge and Dash and Monero and all these things. I've looked through these things and I've made my choice based on what I think is the best one, and it's no secret that one I think is Monero. But I have reasons as to why. It's not just because, oh, they say this, or these people say this, or this white paper says this. It's what do they currently have that's working now? Are they advancing the privacy conversation, which I feel like Monero is. They've got a Monero research lab that is doing research. But this isn't about Monero. This is about people understanding privacy. This is about people understanding how privacy works. Because most people have no concept of how privacy works. Most people think, oh, I switch on a Tor browser and I'm private. And that's not the way it works. Once again, I gave the example of stylometry. And I'll just go ahead and put that right here. Oops, I got caps for some reason. Stylometry. I think that's how it's spelled. You go ahead and do a quick Google on that term. It's pretty crazy how more and more the reality that software is not enough to keep us safe. It's becoming a reality. So let's talk about. No, let me ask you guys. Jeff, Riku, the guys who have talked so far. What would you guys like to talk about? Would you like to talk about kind of cryptocurrencies as a whole right now? Would you like to talk about kind of privacy, threat modeling, these types of things, and so we can make critical observations about all the coins that are in existence. I don't know. What do you guys think? If I don't get a response, I'll probably go ahead and choose something. But what is Wraith? Okay. Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about that then. Hello, Raymond. Thanks for talking. Glad that you guys came. I will say one last time, just as a disclaimer, Oh, okay, yeah. Thanks, Rico. Yeah, we'll go ahead and talk about those too. So, and you know what is Wraith and BlockSci and stuff? Those are actually kind of fairly interconnected. So we'll go ahead and talk about those things. Um, let's start with blockchain analysis. Okay, so the blockchain, as you guys know, is an immutable ledger, and what that means is it's a ledger that can't be retroactively changed. It's a database to which fields and data can only be added. And what that means is the entire history of all transactions forever is on that blockchain. Okay, so back 2013 Silk Road, you know, people thought Bitcoin was super untraceable, and at the time there wasn't a lot of blockchain analysis tools. So they were fairly untraceable at that moment in time. But actually, now that blockchain analysis has improved a great deal, because those things are still in the history, okay, the government or BlockSci or anyone with access to blockchain analysis tools can actually look back and see those transactions and analyze those transactions made in 2013 when the technology did not exist, and they're able to work some things out and potentially put some people on some different lists. You know what I'm saying? Um, blockchain analysis is only improving, and more, you're not able to hide. And as I said before, you're not able to hide through Tor, even through normal means of browsing anymore. You've got to have a lot more operational security in your head, and you know you got to have your OPSEC really nailed down. But the same is going to apply to cryptocurrencies. More and more, you're not just going to be able to put your transactions through Tor and say, I am safe. It doesn't work that way. Because just as stylometry is able to you know, help identify people, and other things, not just stylometry, they're able to help identify people even when they're using Tor. There's blockchain analysis is getting better and better, that they're going to be able to identify people without IP addresses. Most of the Tor busts that have happened, all of them actually, have not been because Tor has leaked IP addresses. They have not been because there's been a fault in the Tor technology. It's been because of other means, OPSEC failures or different forms of analysis. And the same is going to be true of blockchain. If they're already doing this for Tor, why do we think this is not going to apply to blockchain? Okay, so as blockchain analysis gets better and better and better, it doesn't matter if you're using Tor and you've got your IP addresses hidden and stuff like that, they're still going to be able to do different analyses on the blockchain and say, you know, we can say with great certainty that this person was the person that sent the transaction. And people have gone to jail for less. If they can prove, you know, and I don't want to get into the politics of it. Okay, what determines whether somebody is guilty or not? You know, how much percent certainty do you need? We're not going to get into that. The fact of the matter is, people have been thrown into jail for less. So, in regards to the current blockchain analysis tools that do exist, like you mentioned, Riku, you know, there is BlockSci, and to be honest, we don't know everything that exists. And I don't think that we will know everything that exists. Without, you know, putting my tinfoil hat on too much, it just stands to reason that if somebody has a good tool and they don't want people to start looking at how that tool functions so that way they can hide, you know, let's say the government, they're not going to just say, oh, look, we're doing this. You know, unless there's a big bust and a big case and they have to show how they got the data or whatever. But we don't know everything that exists right now. But what we do know is there are things like correlation attacks. You know, there are things like, let's say I don't connect to the network. Let's say I don't have my wallet connected to the network 24/7, right? And then I pop on for a second, I sync the blockchain of what I missed, and then I send a transaction, and then I get off again. You know, my ISP does see that Diego connected to the Bitcoin network or to known Bitcoin nodes at this time and disconnected at this time. And they can see on the blockchain that that roughly coincides with these transactions in these blocks. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of analysis tools that they can do that are temporal, that are you know, correlated and stuff, and That's why they can follow Bitcoin on the public ledger through thousands and thousands of wallets when people try to send Bitcoin to themselves and mix it with themselves and stuff, and it just doesn't work anymore, not with the new tools that are out. So privacy is hard. You know, if you get nothing out of this, privacy is hard. Man, it's not easy. And you can be a good coder without knowing how to be really private using OPSEC and stuff like that. You can be a good cryptographer and not know these things, because as a cryptographer your job is to get the math and make it all working so that way nothing is leaked, right? That doesn't mean that you yourself know about stylometry or stuff like that. You know, the probability is higher that you would know that as a cryptographer, just because of the space that you work in and the people that you hang around, probably, you know, in terms of co-workers and friends and people with the same interests. But that doesn't make you an expert on privacy. You know, and I'm not necessarily claiming to be an expert on privacy. I'm not. I've done my fair share of research. I hang out with people that are really good at OPSEC and stuff like that. And I mean, if they were so good, then why would I know they are, right? But privacy is hard. It's really, really difficult to get right. And so just tacking on one or two different privacy technologies does not a privacy coin make. But again, I would say it depends on your threat model. So now we're going to get into Wraith, now we're going to get into Verge, now we're going to get into Monero, and you know, we can, if you have questions about other privacy coins, oh, what about, you know, what about this one? They claim to have this. You know, let's talk about it. That's fine. Let's talk about it. But let's start with Wraith. Okay, what is Wraith? From what I can tell, after reading their white paper, you know, I'm not a coder, so I haven't looked in their code. But from their white paper, and they could surprise me, and I hope that they do. I hope that they do. It's like, oh, we not only added this, but this and this and this inside of Wraith. Because if they did, you know, that means, once again, we can have a good conversation about competition. Okay, does this move the space forward? Is privacy getting better for everyone? That's what I want ultimately. Privacy to get better for everyone. That's the ultimate goal. That privacy, financial privacy in particular, because this is cryptocurrencies, gets better for everyone across the world. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how much money you make. You have access to this kind of privacy. That's what I want to see happen. And if Monero is the one to bring that, great. If Monero is not the one to bring that, great. As long as somebody brings it. Okay, so let's talk about Wraith. From what I can see after reading the white paper, they are bringing in stealth addresses. And, you know, some people can say, oh, this has been a technology from 2014, or, you know, there's a lot of things that can be said about stealth addresses. Instead of talking about, instead of kind of flapping our mouths with typical FUD stuff, let's talk about it. Is stealth addresses, if it's implemented on its own, let's operate under the assumption that it's implemented just on its own, is it enough? That's where threat modeling comes in. Enough for what? Enough for who? Who are we defending against? I am going to go to the extreme of the extreme of the extreme and say our threat model is we are defending our privacy against state-level actors. You know, people who have passive surveillance set up that can look and that can make these sorts of, because let's be honest, I can't do stylometry. I don't have enough info about any of you guys here present to be able to, and I don't have the software or the resources to be able to make that sort of linguistic fingerprint about you. But the government does, because they passively sort of watch everything, right? So they have enough on pretty much everybody. Maybe even Facebook does, you know? They probably do. Only the people with access to the amount of data and the analysis tools will be able to do these things. And the government at this point in time is probably the biggest one. So let's go to the extreme of the extreme of the extreme. Because you know what? If your threat model is hiding your transactions from your family, stealth addressing may do the trick. It really might. Stealth addressing on its own. But if your threat model is from a government, it's probably not going to do the trick. And let's talk about why. So what a stealth address is, for those who don't know what it is it's somewhat similar to a blueprint. You know, you've got your public key out there, and from your public key, when somebody sends you a transaction, using your public key, it generates a one-time address that is posted on the blockchain instead of your wallet address. So what that means is if I send you 3 transactions, each of those 3 transactions is going to appear to go to a different address, even though they're all going to the same address. And only you, with your private keys, will be able to decipher each of those public addresses and say that was actually meant for me. Oh, sorry, decipher those stealth addresses and say that was actually meant for me. Those coins are mine. Nobody else is going to be able to look at those stealth addresses and link those 3 transactions to the same wallet. Which sounds great. It sounds great in theory. Now let's take a look at a public blockchain where you can see outputs going through the blockchain to different places. Let's say I send you a transaction with a public address. I mean with the stealth address. I'm so sorry. Let's say I send you a transaction utilizing stealth addresses. So on the blockchain, nobody sees where it is going to. But if I look at the whole blockchain, I can see 5 currency units left Diego, and around a similar time 5 currency units, we don't know on the blockchain, we don't see who Diego sent it to, but I do see that 5 currency units are in this wallet, a specific wallet, not a random wallet, a specific wallet, around the same time. Now you would have plausible deniability if there were multiple people around that time that received 5 currency units. Because then you could say, well, I could be any of the, it could be that person. Diego could have sent a transaction to any of these people. But if you're the only one at that point in time that received 5 currency units, then you're pretty much outed as the person that received my transaction. Does that make sense to you guys? I'll wait for somebody to say something. Alright, maybe I won't get anything. That's fine. We'll go ahead and continue. Okay, so stealth addresses on their own and using a public blockchain, that does not make privacy, especially against people that are going to be able to use their blockchain analysis tools to see which wallets received what at what times. It's just not feasible from a privacy perspective. So then they can say, okay, I can say with reasonable certainty, Diego sent 5 currency units to this transaction. And the puzzle's complete. Exactly. Like Tor users getting busted for being the only ones on the network using Tor, which happens in, potentially if you're on a university network or if you're on a work network or stuff like that. Great, that's fantastic. Great that you see that. So, what Wraith Protocol says is that, first of all, we're going to use Tor because right now, to my understanding, Tor is not integrated on their core wallet, even though they say it is on their website. But it's not. So Tor is going to be implemented, and I2P I think is already implemented. So that hides your IP address. And the claim from Verge for quite some time, especially before Wraith Protocol, is that hiding your IP address is enough. But we can see from Tor users already getting busted without their IP addresses being leaked, it's not enough. It's enough if you're operating under a small threat model, but it's not enough if you're operating under the threat model of a government state. So that on its own is not going to do anything. Now let's talk about Monero. Monero does not have Kavri implemented yet. You can manually route your wallet through Tor or I2P, and it's a bit of a pain. You can do it. Most people don't. So because of that, you can see some IP addresses. You can see the IP addresses of the people on the Monero network. That doesn't mean you see the IP addresses of transactions as they're going, but you do get a general feel about who in the world is using Monero software. Okay, so that does pose a small risk. That does put all of these people on a list, right? Now, the way networking works and stuff, when I send a transaction, I have to propagate it to the network. I have to tell the whole network, I, Diego, I'm sending money to this address. And with Monero, all that information is obfuscated about how much and to who, and actually the fact that I'm doing it. But as I'm propagating it to the network, I have to connect to another node to tell them that I'm making this transaction. And so they will see an IP address connect to that node. This node will see an IP address. Now, this is vulnerable to Sybil attacking, and what Sybil attacking means is that if one entity controls a huge majority of the nodes, then let me explain it like this. Let's say, for the sake of argument, there's 10 nodes in the network. Okay, so when I make a transaction with this guy, and I propagate to the rest of the network, I tell this guy, he tells these guys tell these guys. Nobody knows if they're merely propagating the transaction for somebody else. So the IP address that is connecting to them could simply be propagating the transaction to the rest of the network, or it could be the originator. Okay, they don't know. The only way you could know for sure is if you own the majority of the nodes on the network, let's say 5 or 6, this whole hand is owned by one guy. And so when I propagate to the network, they say, okay, which IP address propagated first? And because we own the majority of the network, we can be reasonably sure that the one that we received first is the originator. Does that make sense? That's called a Sybil attack, where you have most of the nodes on the network. So Monero, at its current point in time, is potentially vulnerable to Sybil attacking via IP address leak. If somebody owns the majority of networks in the world, the majority of the nodes in the world, they could potentially utilize a Sybil attack to see who the originating IP address is. Now, once Kavri is implemented, and even right now, using Tor and I2P, if you manually do it, which is a pain, you can go ahead and help obfuscate that data as well. And that is why Kavri is being implemented. So that way nobody can Sybil attack the network, because all transactions will be routed through the Kavri network. But it's not implemented yet, and I will make that. I'm not afraid to say that. I'm not afraid to be critical of Monero in some respects. Monero does not have an easy way. It is possible, but it does not have an easy way to connect to Tor and I2P at the moment, and we are working on that. Hopefully Kavri will be in alpha soon. You can check out our website, getkavri.org, for some updates and stuff like that. It's about to be revamped by me. I make the websites, actually. So that is a vulnerability in Monero, and it's one that theoretically does not exist in Verge, except for the fact that, as stated, Verge's core wallet doesn't really route transactions through Tor, which I didn't know until a few days ago, and I have not verified that. Okay, so do your own research, guys. Don't believe everything I say. Because I may know just as little as the rest of you guys on some respects. So let's go and hop back. Verge says, okay, we obfuscate IP addresses, and that is enough. But we know that that's not enough because, like Riku said, Tor users are getting busted for various reasons, And so they say, okay, we have the IP address obfuscation, and we have stealth addresses now with Wraith. And we already talked about kind of stealth addressing and stuff like that. Is that enough on a public blockchain? No, because of various correlation attacks and stuff like that. That is also not going to be enough. I will be completely honest. If your threat model is hiding your transactions from the common everyday person, Verge will be sufficient for you. I do not think it will be sufficient for your internet service provider if you're trying to model around them, because I'm not going to talk about that, but for sure, we're just going to talk about the extreme. For sure, it's not going to be enough for if your threat model, if you're trying to model around, a state actor like the government with passive surveillance, especially because they can just subpoena your IP address. Okay, what time was this guy connecting to nodes and stuff like that. So it depends on your threat model, and threat modeling is not talked enough. It's not talked about enough in the crypto space. If you are trying to remain private, you need to know from who and what resources they have and what you need to do to counteract their resources and what resources are available to you. If your threat model is fairly small, Verge will be sufficient for quote-unquote everyday privacy. If it's any bigger than that, Verge is not sufficient. So let's talk about Monero's technology, and then let's talk about what again, I want Monero to have competition. I really do. I want it to have good competition because it does nothing but push the space forward. Let's talk about what it would take to be good competition for Monero. So Monero does have stealth addresses, but it's in combination with other things. So remember in my example of de-anonymizing a transaction that had a stealth address, I used the transaction amount. 5 currency units was sent from Diego's wallet, and 5 was received around the same block time in this other wallet. So utilizing the transaction amount, I was able to deobfuscate this transaction. So Monero has something called confidential transactions, ring-CT, and what that means is nobody knows the transaction amount except for the people that actually did it. And just so you don't have to go read the white paper, although you can if you want, it's kind of cool, just to give an example of how something like this can be done, let's say the transaction amount was 10 that I was sending. I was sending 10 Monero, in this case, to another wallet. How can we want the miners to know that no Monero is being created or destroyed in this transaction. If I send 10 Monero and you receive 11 Monero, then 1 Monero was just created, causing inflation, and everybody else's Monero is worth less. And now you're richer and you shouldn't be. If Monero was destroyed in the transaction, I sent 10 and you received 9, you don't get fair compensation, you need different stuff. So we need to make sure no Monero, no currency unit is created or destroyed when a transaction happens without revealing to the miners what the transaction amount is. And we do that, at its simplest form, we do that by multiplying both sides of the equation, 10 from Diego, 10 to you, 10 equals 10. We multiply by a shared number that we know. Let's say that number is 8. We multiply both sides of the equation, so now we have 80 equals 80. That's not the real number, and you and I are the only ones that know the number we multiplied by. But we can give this to the miners, 80 equals 80, and they say, okay, we don't know the real amount that was sent, but we can verify that both sides of the equation are equal, so no currency was created or destroyed in this transaction. Okay, and so that's kind of a cool technology. Sorry to go off on that little rabbit trail about how it works, but Monero obfuscates the amount. So nobody knows how much was actually sent. So this form of attack where you can say this much Monero was sent, this much was received, and go ahead and do analysis based on that, it actually doesn't work. It doesn't work with Monero because the amounts are completely obfuscated. And I explain it in a very simplistic manner. It's actually much more complex than that. It's not amounts necessarily that are sent, it's commitments, Peterson commitments, and blah, 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 blah. But this kind of attack is not feasible on Monero. But we can potentially talk about correlation attacks with the sender. You know, I know Diego is good friends with such and such person, and I know that they've been talking about through passive surveillance. You know, I know that they've been talking about Monero and how potentially I might send him some Monero soon and stuff like that. So anytime Diego sends a transaction, if the sender is not obfuscated as well, I can say, you know, there's a probability that when Diego sends a transaction, it may be to this friend. And it doesn't matter the stealth address, it doesn't matter that I don't know the amount, I know that it's going to this guy. Okay, so Monero includes ring signatures. And what ring signatures do is you mix with other people. So basically, for every output that goes out, you mix with other outputs. And so it could be you, but you're mixing with these 4 other people. It could be any of you 5 that is sending this transaction. And there's attacks on that, you know, like how are outputs selected, which ones are most likely to be the thing, and that's why Zcash, you know, they put out a paper on MoneroLink.com, which they were able to fairly accurately de-anonymize pre-2017 most of the transactions because Monero did not have ring-CT then. We do now, and so the attack that they were talking about is no longer valid for Monero in its current state, but it did work back then, you know, and that is a flaw. So, see, you know, privacy is tough. Monero had ring signatures, Monero had stealth addresses, you know, and still they were able to track outputs, not people. They were able to track outputs through the blockchain. And now with RingCT, that's no longer a feasible attack, so those outputs cannot be followed through the blockchain. But yeah, there you go. So Monero, and you can read up more on the different Monero privacy technologies on the website and on the Reddit and stuff like that. So let's talk about, I believe at this current point in time, what is the most important is that Monero traffic is private by default. I just got a question. Did you watch any of the 34C3 talks? How many Monero presentations were there? I wasn't able to watch any of those talks, unfortunately. I was busy with family. I had a huge holidays season. I come from a big family, and basically everybody was here, so I wasn't able to watch those. I want to watch those soon. I know for sure there was a hardware presentation, a hardware wallet presentation. I know for sure there was a Monerujo, which is a mobile Android wallet presentation. But other than that, I don't know how many other presentations there were from Monero. I'm sorry about that. You can look at Monero's technology in further detail on the websites and stuff and asking about it in the Stack Exchange. What would it take to be a good Monero competitor? Well, right now the most important thing is that Monero is private by default. Another way of de-anonymizing people, even with Tor, is if you visit an esoteric, on the ClearNet, if you visit an esoteric website, esoteric meaning something that, not many people use, we'll just use that definition in this case. If you go to a website that not very many people go to, let's say your website, let's say you make your own personal website, nobody is going to your personal website, right? And then you get on Tor, and you also go to your personal website. Even though you're hopping between all of these nodes, somebody can say, okay, somebody who's analyzing the network can say, okay, the end node connected to to Diego's personal website. Who visits Diego's personal website? Diego visits Diego's personal website. And at that point, your entire, all of your hops, it doesn't matter, you're de-anonymized. Basically, with a fairly good degree of certainty, you are de-anonymized, which means if you continue on this path with these three nodes that you're hopping between to get to your final destination, and you connect to another place, and it doesn't matter where you go from that point, they can say anything that uses this path is Diego. Does that make sense? So that's kind of it's the Tor de-anonymization technique, and it's very important that you don't out yourself in these ways. And you can read about more of these things. And for anyone who's interested, I can later give some links for some good general OPSEC rules. It's not everything, but it's a good starting place, if you're trying to learn about operational security. Monero is private by default, and it's very important. The Tor project recommends that you use Tor for all of your browsing, so that way the passive surveiller does not see that this guy uses these things. He uses ClearNet for everything, and then only once in a while he'll hop on Tor. And it's like, oh, why does he feel like he needs to hop on Tor for these kinds of things? What's he trying to do? So I'm added to the list. I'm added to a list. Maybe a few lists. Like let's go ahead and take a closer look at the network times when Diego is connected to the Tor network, so we can see what he's up to. So we can see that he's not selling drugs or something like that, right? Tor says, well, if all of your internet traffic is going through Tor, you're not outing certain portions of your internet time as Tor time, as potentially illegal time. If you just constantly use Tor, always, then all of your traffic looks the same. It doesn't matter what. So the same is true for cryptocurrencies, and this is especially true for opt-in privacy. Okay, and we can talk about fungibility issues and stuff, and we'll probably get to that later depending on time. But it is so important that privacy be default and mandatory. At minimum default, preferably mandatory, because otherwise you have people transacting in public, and then I have this one private transaction. And this just completely sticks out. It's like, oh, what was Diego doing with that private transaction? Does that make sense? So any currency that kind of has an opt-in privacy it really just draws attention to those private transactions, and that's not what you want. But when every transaction is private by default, no transaction stands out from anybody. So instead of analyzing just these transactions and the correlations surrounding them, we would have to analyze the entire network, and now we're back to square one. How do we analyze a private network, right? So so what does it take to be a good Monero competitor? Good privacy technology and privacy by default. That's all it takes. That's all it takes. Okay? Good privacy technology and privacy by default. So let's talk about Zcash. I really respect zk-SNARKs. It has some resource issues, like making a Z to Z transaction takes a lot of processing power and a good amount of time, but those can be worked on. Okay, usability issues can be worked on, and especially as computers get better and better and better. Issues that are fundamentally broken privately cannot be worked on. You have to have a different thing altogether, right? So if Zcash was private by default, it would be a really good Monero competitor. For privacy, I wouldn't say for currency, and we can talk about that in a little bit if people have that kind of question, but it would be a good privacy competitor for Monero. But it's not right now, and recently a paper came out that was submitted to the Zcash Foundation saying that you could de-anonymize a good amount of T to Z transactions just using analysis, like we were talking about, just using analysis, because only like 10% of the transactions are Z to Z transactions, which is completely shielded, completely private. But because that set is so small, you can make reasonable assumptions about different other transactions and potentially de-anonymize other transactions, and maybe sorry, lost my train of thought there. Zcash would be a great competitor to Monero with its zk-SNARKs. It could be a great privacy competitor to Monero if it was not opt-in privacy. And this is just the fact of the matter, guys. It really is. So when Monero people in the community has not necessarily always been known at being the most forgiving and stuff like that, and I can't make excuses for everybody. I try not to be like that, but it's pretty funny sometimes to watch. But if a privacy-focused currency is privacy-focused, they need to be private by default. And at its core, the fact that people don't realize this is simply, I don't think people are malicious. I generally don't. Some people might. At its core, it's people understanding blockchain technology, but not privacy and security. They understand a little bit about privacy and security, and so they apply what they know to their blockchain. But they don't have a good understanding of what constitutes privacy and how it is achieved and why it is hard. Either that, or they could be operating under a smaller threat model. They can say our threat model isn't the government, so when we say our privacy works, it may work for our threat model. And they could be absolutely correct. And I think a lot of people are operating under different threat models, and because the threat models are not explicitly stated, there's a lot of division, there's a lot of argument. They say, oh no, our privacy works. And like, no, it doesn't. Well, they're just, these two parties are operating under different threat models, so both statements are correct. The privacy could work for these people under their threat model, and Monero could be overkill for that, right? But for Monero's threat model, the privacy doesn't work. So they're both correct. The threat models are just not defined. Similar to when, there's an argument going down and it's really just because there's a definition discrepancy between two people, and if they were to define, what they're arguing about, it's like, oh, actually we agree. Oh, imagine that. We were just operating under different definitions, but we actually agree the whole time. As a good rule of thumb, if the privacy is opt-in, it's not good privacy. Because Monero is one of the very, very, very few that has privacy by default, it is the best privacy competitor in the space, hands down, and there's just There's no competition at the moment, unfortunately. Unfortunately, you know, again, I want there to be competition. It pushes the whole scene forward. Um, so, as an example, Dash has a privacy send feature, and they have a big bounty. You know, they have a big bounty, and they say, well, if you're so sure that our stuff can be cracked, then crack it and get the bounty. See, they are operating under the threat model that the average person would be able to have the amount of data, would be able to look at the whole blockchain and have the analysis tools and stuff, and having even external tools about people's behaviors to be able to de-anonymize these transactions. And most of us don't. I don't, so I would say I can't do that, man, because I don't have access to these things. But that's not to say that nobody doesn't have access to these things. Does that make sense? So, I mean, and if the government doesn't want the Dash money, man, like if the government's able to de-anonymize these things, that's more valuable to them. Being able to keep tabs on people is way more valuable to them than whatever amounts of money that Dash can give them. Different threat models. Different threat models. Monero is operating under the most extreme, we're modeling under the most extreme conditions. We are saying everybody is after us, and it shows in the culture. Okay, it shows in the paranoid culture of Monero, and it's kind of funny to see. I think it's healthy in some respects because it leads to healthier, more private software, but it does obviously have its drawbacks in the way that some people can be treated. But Monero is operating under, they say, you know, I may not be under these conditions, but somebody is. And we must think that people's finances, their freedom, or their lives depend on our software, depend on us being completely private. So, yeah, you know, and then there's currency issues. For example, you know, Zcash can't be audited, and if the trusted setup was broken, then infinite amounts of coins would be able to be made undetected. So it has some flaws as a currency. And, you know, a lot of things have flaws as currencies, and these things can be potentially worked on. So Raymond just asked, I get why users of other coins defend, but how is it possible that the creators can defend in the face of technological facts? Also, when services are adding coins, it's always Zcash or whatever, is it just harder for XMR to be adopted? Okay, so let's start with the first question. There's a couple of reasonable ways why a creator can defend the currency. One, they could be malicious. Okay, let's assume the maximum amount of malice. They actually work for the government, or they work for an adversary that is trying to track you down, and they say, oh, it's completely safe because they want you to keep using it so they can track you. Okay, that's one. You know, that's almost impossible to prove. People will call you conspiracy theorists. You know, those things like that. Is it possible? Sure, it's possible. Anything's possible. I'm not going to make claims on different currencies about whether or not that's the case, or my opinions on that. But it's always possible. Two, they may not be malicious. They might just be, I don't want to say stupid, they might just not understand privacy. Like I'm talking to you guys. They don't understand how it works. They're good coders, they understand blockchain technology, but they haven't done their due diligence in terms of operational security, what is required for good privacy, threat modeling, all these different things. You ask them, what is your threat model? They're not going to have an answer for you. They might just be completely clueless as to how real privacy, working privacy, how it works, how it operates, right? So it's very possible for uneducated people, privacy illiterate people, to make grandiose claims about their privacy and defend it to the bone because in their understanding of privacy, it works, but it doesn't. But they just don't know that because they don't know how privacy works, you know? The other thing is, the last one, they could be operating under a different threat model. Once again, so when they say our privacy works, it could work for their threat model. And you can throw technological facts at them at how it doesn't work for a bigger threat model, you know, like if you're modeling for like nation states or stuff like that. But that's not what they're modeling under, so they're not going to answer those things. They're like, no, they don't explicitly say we're operating under this threat model, but that's what they are, so their privacy works for them. So, in regards to services adding things like Zcash or whatever, for those who don't know, Monero is not made on the Bitcoin core code. It's made using it was made from the ground up with CryptoNote, and so yeah, it does take a little bit longer to code something from scratch for Monero. Whereas Zcash, and Bitcoin, and this is the case with any of Bitcoin's clones, anything that is basically based on Bitcoin's code base, there's a huge ecosystem that has been built around that. And there's a lot of wallets that, adding a new Bitcoin-based currency would be as simple as, tweaking a few things and say, yeah, we launched it. But for Monero, you can't just tweak a few things because it's a completely different code base, actually. Takes a little more work. So, yeah, hopefully, if you guys have any questions, specific questions about privacy, threat modeling, operational security, those kinds of things, or, what do you think about this coin? What do you think about this coin? I can let you know. My answer will probably be, for those coin questions at the very beginning, does it have opt-in privacy? Yes. Okay. Sorry. Basically, I'm referring to Zooko needling XMR at 34C3. Is it just because he holds much value and must continue the charade? Zooko has a couple of points, in my opinion. Zcash has stronger theoretical privacy than Monero does with zk-SNARKs. And Monero's privacy is not as strong as Zcash's because we use ring signature stealth addresses and ring CT and soon to be Kovri. But we don't use zk-SNARKs, which is objectively pretty much better if used by default and mandatory, which it's not. So you see how the technology is actually better, but the implementation is not. So that's why at this point in time, Monero, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, Monero is still the better privacy coin at this point in time. If Zcash was to launch with private by default, then they would be the better privacy coin. They would be the better privacy software. I wouldn't say coin. I wouldn't say currency. So, once again, when I'm talking about currency, I'm thinking, okay, is it possible for this thing to become the global reserve currency? Is it possible for this thing to replace the US dollar? If there's no guarantees that more can't be printed out of nowhere and we wouldn't be able to detect it, then no, I don't see that happening. Also, if there's a big pre-mine, like 20%, which is basically what the founder's reward is, then that just means that if Zcash becomes the global reserve currency, somebody or some small group of people has 20% of the supply via pre-mine or founder's reward or whatever, which basically puts us in the same situation as our current financial crisis, where we have so many people who own so much of the money and the rest of us who own the rest. Is it better? Yeah, it's better, but we're not trying to be better, in my opinion. I'm an idealist. I'm going for the best. What do you think about storing mnemonic seeds directly in paper wallets? Do you think this is safe? Wouldn't it be better to only have encrypted versions of your keys? Okay, so there's a lot of ways. See, once again, it depends on your threat model. It depends on your threat model how you store your seeds. There's a ghost behind every bush. Let me put it like that. If you put it in any way digitally, okay, let's say that you have a laptop, you never connect it to the internet, you never connect this other thing. Who was the hardware made by? Who was the software made by? Is there an attack vector? Is there some way that somebody can stick a USB and get it from you there? And with mnemonic seeds on paper wallets, like, what if there's a fire? What if there's a flood? Okay, well, maybe just memorize your seed. Okay, what if you get in a car accident and this is one of the toughest things in the space, for sure. Securing your money. How do I secure my money? How do I store my mnemonic seeds? How do I keep them safe? It's really tough, and it really depends. It depends on your threat model. An interesting thing that you can do. Okay, an interesting thing that you can do, and I've heard this on I read this, I'm sorry, where you take your mnemonic seed and you split it into three portions. You know, part one has the first so many words, part two has the next so many words, and part three has the next so many words. You give this first portion to a trusted person. You keep the second portion in a safe, and you keep the third portion in like a bank safe box or something like that. And so that way, oh no, I'm sorry, I messed up. You give 1 and 3 to a trusted individual. You give 2 and 1 to yourself, and 2 and 3 to the bank safe box. And so what that does is, if you have any two, if you get any two of these things, you can reproduce your seed. But any one by itself is not enough. But yeah, encrypting your keys, always a good thing. You know, as long as you're certain, you know, as long as you're well versed in things like PGP and stuff, yes, go ahead, completely encrypt your keys, your mnemonic seed, those kinds of things. It's very helpful. Another fun thing that you can do is a multi-sig wallet, where it very similarly, you have, you know, 2 of 3 people needing to sign with their private keys in order for the money to be spent. You keep one private key. You give another private key to a trusted friend, and you put another private key in a bank safe deposit box. And now, if you get compromised, if your home gets compromised or burned down, you can still retrieve your key from your friend in safe deposit box and still have access to your money. Or, you know, if your friend gets compromised, well, you would need to be compromised in your safe deposit box, etc. So there's a lot of fun stuff you can do. You have to always think, what are the attack vectors on this? I would personally say, and I say this with great reservation, don't listen to anything I say because I'm an idiot. But you know, encrypting your keys and putting it someplace relative that you can find it anywhere on the internet is a moderately safe thing to do, because all of encryption would have to break in order for that to be attacked, unless your computer was compromised. And yeah, you know, okay, yeah, it's really tough. Anyway, electronics, hardware wallets can fail, paper can burn, anything can happen. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, at some point, though, you know, in your threat, you can just be paranoid to the max, and then you would just you'd never be able to do anything with your seed. You know, at some point, you have to say, okay, I'm willing to make a concession here for the sake of being able to access my money. So, yeah, anybody else here have any questions or stuff like that? I'm curious, how many people here actually came from the post on Verge subreddit that I did versus like the cryptocurrency subreddit or whatever. In retrospect, it wasn't a good idea. I've been wanting to do something like this for a long time. I really have, to post to the Verge subreddit, and I see now that my timing just makes people go, oh, this is just complete fudge. You're just trying to take advantage, and I accept that. I own that. The timing was very, very bad. I've wanted to do something this for a long time. This decision was made out of emotion because I wanted to see Wraith drop. I wanted to see it good, so that way Monero has competition. And it didn't. It didn't drop completely. It may drop very soon. It didn't drop completely, but and even if it does, from what we can see currently of the code, they can have a lot of code hidden, not pushed to GitHub yet. But it's not just going to be anything more than stealth and justice. That's disappointing. It's disappointing for me. I'm not surprised, but I'm disappointed. Yeah, if there's no more questions, I'll give a couple more minutes for questions. If there's no more questions, we can go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks for coming, guys. I didn't think anybody would be here. So, yeah, super glad. Even if it was just preaching to the choir, as long as people understand, you know, even so many people in Monero don't understand. Privacy is hard. You know, privacy is really hard, and it's not so simple as I use the right software and I'm completely safe. It doesn't work like that. And if anybody ever tells you it does, they are a liar, they are malicious, or they're stupid. I guess being a liar and being malicious may go hand in hand. All right, any last minute things? No. All All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys. I hope the messy bookshelf behind me didn't distract people too much. What's the best way to communicate with me? I'm on IRC. I'm on Mattermost. I'm on Reddit. I'm Rerar everywhere. REHARAR. It's a pretty stupid name. I got it by just typing random stuff. So yeah, you can contact me any of these places. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. I try to be a super approachable. Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being a part of this. This was actually pretty fun. Maybe I'll do something like this later in the future. I'll catch you guys later.